Hello, insiders, and welcome to this new episode of the EU Bubble Insider. Today, our guest is Julia Poliscanova from Transport and Environment. She's the Senior Director for e-mobility and electric vehicles. Julia, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Hi, Chris. Hi, everyone. Really nice to be on the podcast.
I'm really happy to have you with us today as we will discuss both your already 15-year-long career in Brussels and the future of transport on the continent. So maybe let's start with the career part. And if you could introduce our listeners to, first of all, what it is you exactly do as Transport and Environment Senior Director, and how did your passion for energy start? Where did you first start this path to becoming a clean transport and e-mobility expert?
So I'm with TNE now for almost 10 years. As TNE Transport and Environment, we are today the largest NGO in Brussels, and generally we're the largest NGO working on clean transport in Europe. We're headquartered in Brussels, but we basically have footprint in most European capitals. What do I do? So I oversee all the work that we can do. Largely it is advocacy. So lobbying, as well as more public-facing work and evidence gathering, etc., around vehicles, batteries, and raw materials. So leading campaigns on things like the vehicle CO2 standards, for example, to reach 100% electric vehicles in 2035 was something I worked on a lot. I worked a lot on sustainable batteries and more recently on raw materials and various policies that Europe is putting in place on more responsible and secure supply of raw materials. How did I get here? Well, it's always a long story, also sometimes a random one, but I was a really young student coming from Latvia to London, very excited, doing a bachelor's degree in international relations and politics. And being from Latvia, but so close to Russia, the topic of energy and energy security was always very topical, was topical already 20 years ago. So I was doing my bachelor thesis actually on Europe's energy independence from Russia. That was 2007, by the way, so I'm not that young. And back then, as I was researching all of these topics around gas, etc., I have come across the concepts of renewable energy and energy efficiency as an energy security policy, as something to become energy independent. It was new to me at the time. I literally learned about it as part of my research, and ultimately that was my thesis. I was saying that Europe should do a lot more around renewables and energy efficiency to be energy independent. And then rewind a few years, I finished in Brussels, still interested in energy, but still from the geopolitical perspective. But then in Brussels, as it happens to so many of us, I was immersed into the world of climate policies, and I have realized that the only way actually, at least at that time, to get to more energy security kind of acceleration in renewables energy was via climate policy, right? And I've always been fascinated by change. I like to be where change happens. So I finished in the Brussels bubble, working on all of these policies, which I believe make Europe not just greener, but also more independent.
And because you mentioned the targets, and in the debate around energy, renewable energy in Europe, there's always you always hear about the targets from whatever perspective you approach it. The focus is on reaching specific targets for specific areas of change, and what is usually the part of the discussion is that those targets are challenging because we need so many skilled workers that are not available. We need so for example, wind energy, it's permitting. Depending on where you look, there are challenging targets. What, from your point of view, is the most challenging thing that the clean transport sector has to address in actually reaching targets that are, I think, rather ambitious?
Right. So I actually think that it's, maybe some of these things in the media, kind of how targets are difficult. I don't see it that way. I believe that how does change happen? In my view, change happens when you, from a business perspective, when you give some a very clear objective, call it a target, right? So you say to a company X, in 10 years' time, you have to, for example, produce 10% of your vehicle stock as electric. Right? If the target needs to be ambitious, otherwise there's no change. If the target is just based on business as usual, we might as well not bother because it will happen, right? So it needs to be ambitious to drive the change, aligned with what we need to do based on the best science we have, for example, climate science. But it also needs to be at the right length of time to give enough time to change, and what's really important, have the right enabling conditions to get there. And I think we focus too much in Brussels on the targets. There's nothing wrong with any of our targets. If anything, any climate scientist will tell you our targets are not ambitious enough, we can go faster. But what we need to do better is all the alignment, kind of enabling policies around this, as well as people mindsets to achieve those targets. So what is the hardest today in clean transport? I would say it's actually a lot of people's mindsets. If we talk about electric vehicles, it's ultimately you driving exactly the same car in pretty much exactly the same way. You just need to adjust your behavior. Instead of going to a petrol station, most of the time you will be fueling either outside of your house or in a supermarket or at work. I don't believe it's such incredible, crazy change. And yet we as people are not comfortable with change. Little changes makes us uncomfortable. And the hardest one in all of this is actually navigating people's mindsets, taking people with us and really explaining to them that this is not actually that dramatic and this will ultimately bring benefits. But please don't be scared about targets. Targets are completely reachable. We just now need to work all together to make them happen rather than complain about them.
This makes me think, is this how you actually talk about those issues to lawmakers? I really would like to go to this question now, because you presented a very human approach, human side. Like it's not often something people do, because usually when you talk to lawmakers, you talk about data, you talk about targets, you talk about ambitious goals that look well in policy papers. You showed the human side of it, and I often ask guests of this podcast about ways to approach advocacy when you talk to policy makers, lawmakers in the European Parliament, in the European Commission. Is this how you approach conversations like this?
Yes, that's a very good question. So the way I approach those conversations, I focus on two things. The first one is know your topic. The second one is know your audience. And I think these are, for me, the two most important advocacy communication advice, pieces of advice I would give. So first of all, know your topic. Me, myself, one of the things that I really like to do is to become an expert in what I'm talking about. I know my shit, basically. And that's also the attitude we have as TNE. We really want to be experts. We don't just talk about broad concepts. We really understand it. For example, as part of my work at TNE, I have actually acquired a technical master's in batteries and fuel cells. So I really know kind of the physics of it, the chemistry of it, because that really helps, right? So when I speak, I know what I talk about. If I don't, I either don't talk about that topic or I really spend much longer to know about the topic. The second one is really, I think, a very important trick or tip in Brussels is to know the audience. So we speak with so many different people, right? What I would say to a member of the Conservative Party in the European Parliament will be completely different from what I would say to a Green member in the European Parliament. But the objective and the aim is the same. For example, I genuinely believe that the best thing that we can do with our vehicles is to make them all electric. This is the one clear best climate policy for all across the field. I believe in this. I think they should all go electric. There's plenty of analysis and research to support this. But if I talk to someone from the Green political family, I would talk a lot more about climate and whether or not these electric vehicles are fully sustainable and what we can do, etc. etc. However, if I talk to someone more from the right side, I would talk a lot more about the industrial opportunity around this. The fact that China today owns this technology, and if we don't accelerate, we would basically lose our automotive industry, right? So same goal, very different arguments to get there based on the audience.
Do you find it sometimes challenging that the MEPs you speak with are not subject matter experts, because they're not always are, and probably none of them has a technical degree, maybe someone have, but how do you approach talking about stuff? Because at some point you have to get technical, right?
Yes. So I actually very much believe what Einstein, I believe, said. I'm sorry if I'm paraphrasing him wrong, but if you can't explain something to a 7-year-old, you don't understand it. So I don't think that everyone should be an analyst or a PhD student to be in politics. And I worked in politics myself. I worked in the European Parliament. I know how it is. You have to cover so many topics. You can't be an expert. So I believe actually it is the burden or the necessity is on my end to be able to explain everything that I need them to know in terms that they understand. And you can do that. The best speakers in this world can talk about really complicated topics in simple ways, drawing on analogies and examples to bring that. So in a way, it's my task to explain it to them so that they believe in what I'm saying. I don't believe it's their job to learn all of the details so that they speak with me on the same level.
Julia, what do you like the most about your job?
Interactions, absolutely external interactions. So being in a meeting with someone, be it a really smart politician, or advisor, talking about ideas is fantastic. I love also just being at events, so speaking on a panel energizes me. It genuinely gives me energy for the rest of the day. And actually some of the best ideas that I come with are as part of interacting with people. So as I'm talking, suddenly, it clicks in my mind. And I'm like, yes, that's it. I'm never one of these people that are sitting by the window looking at a tree, and contemplating the strategies. I'm really a lot more of a kind of extrovert interaction person.
And what you don't like? I'm sure there is something.
Every job comes with things we don't like, right? I would say for me, just generally repetitive tasks are not my thing, but I'm also really bad at my diary. So all sorts of diary management, I'm just so bad at following up and putting things in the right place and all of these details. Sometimes I look at my agenda the next day and there is 2 or 3 meetings at the same time. I'm like, right, that's going to be fun. So that the diary management is not my thing.
It's clear to me that you ended up in a place you wanted to be, in a place that makes you happy as a professional in your career. So for those who would like to learn something from you, how to get to a place like this, if you could reflect on some important key decisions you made in the past about approaching your career, about following some paths and not following others that I'm sure were available. What were those decisions that you could share with younger people who are just starting out?
So I actually don't believe in this kind of idea that for all of us there is this perfect job. We just need to find it, right? I actually believe that sometimes you start doing something by chance, but you keep doing this, you are curious, you keep learning, and at some point you become good at it. And when you have become good at it, you're noticed, you grow, and suddenly it's your passion. It's not like it was your passion, but it has become your passion because as you were becoming good at it and working hard, you started enjoying this and actually being good at something you do, right? So for me, that's how it happened for me. I didn't know I will finish in an organization working on primarily today batteries and raw materials. I'm such a geek. I love this topic. But if you asked me 10 years ago, I'll be like, why would I be working on raw materials, right? So it's really about just being really curious and becoming an expert in something, working hard. And once you start enjoying it, it becomes your passion.
Now, looking back and at when you started and now, would you say that the topics you're working on became more relevant and more interesting for the broader Brussels bubble community? And if you agree with this, then why do you think that happened?
So the topics have definitely become a lot more relevant, right? Today, at any Christmas dinner conversation, if you mention an electric vehicle, everyone has an opinion, everyone talks about Congo and cobalt, right? So the topic is everywhere. It does come with challenges, however, because on the one hand, you can say this is good. This is good, people are really aware. They're aware not just of the necessity for climate action, but the actual solutions, renewables, electric vehicles, etc. So that's good, people are aware, so it's easier to communicate on that. But on the other hand, it's also harder because today, first of all, everyone is an expert without being an expert. So we all tend to hold these views about things that we, maybe are not experts in, right? So for example, so many times I meet people not working in this sector. I mention electric vehicle. People say, oh, but if it's from coal, then it's worse than a diesel car. It has been rebutted, it has really been shown in so much analysis to be completely false. No one's advocating for coal, but even an electric car driven on coal in Poland today is better than a diesel car. This is just a fact. But yet that myth keeps happening. So sometimes it's just tiring to constantly address these myths people have. That's maybe one part of it. But the second part, maybe talking more about politics and communicating about it. It's also harder because something that once was just a faraway concept, a target in 2020 or 2030, today is becoming reality. And it is, that the actual action and change is really beginning to bite. It's a real thing now. We need to change our behavior. Companies need to change their behavior. Oil demand is decreasing. So as a result, there's also a lot more resistance because of the change actually happening, and change is difficult. Transitions are always difficult, and therefore it becomes harder and harder to talk about those things because you say, right, electric vehicles are working, it's a good technology, charging is happening, but there will always be someone who says, but on my street, there is no charger. And how do you deal with this, right? Yes, somewhere there's still no charger. Maybe it will be there later, but it doesn't mean that the entire system doesn't work. You see? So this individual views on something that is very common versus the need for the longer term vision is a challenge.
The debate about any policy in Brussels, apart from being spread over sometimes very long periods of time, always consist of many different voices that the lawmakers try to listen to. There are industry voices, there are communities with voices, there are national voices, and of course there are NGOs that like transport and environment. And how do you know what your agenda is as an NGO? Where does because for let's say an industry association, the voice comes from the goals of the business it represents. So for an NGO, how do you assess where you stand on specific issues?
Right. So maybe just to take a step back and say, I do believe that generally in our society today, policies and regulations, they affect everybody. Right? So every legitimate stakeholder or rights holder should be at the table. That includes industry, but that also includes civil society, right? Because they do represent that more independent, broader view from environmental side. Now, how do we set our agendas? I mean, we as an organization, we don't work in a vacuum, right? So we are a membership organization as well. We are not just, a bunch of people coming together and waking up and having ideas. So we actually represent over 60 environmental NGOs across Europe. And we have a board which is representative of these organizations. Some are more, we also have experts on our board, people who used to be, for example, ministers in the past or who are academics. So we have someone in Sweden, for example, who is actually, she's now a professor on mobility. So we have these different interests between academia and campaigning NGOs. And within our board, we have a discussion on all across Europe, what are the common problems and what are the best solutions. And as part of that debate, which is always rooted in evidence, we come with solutions. So just to give you an example, we had a really, really long debate about aviation. what to do about aviation. There are no simple solutions, right? And a few solutions that seemed simple were politically unacceptable. And at some point, drawing on a lot of evidence out there, doing our own roadmaps and analysis, and talking with campaigners, we understood that the final strategy has to be twofold. On the one hand, we need a technology solution for aviation. So we as TNE generally are quite often pushing for the clean technological solutions as for decarbonization. That clean technology solution for aviation would be synthetic fuels, for example, synthetic kerosene. However, given how difficult, expensive and lengthy it will take to scale it, we also have to reduce demand. So at the same time, we have to reduce the inefficient demand. For example, companies flying their officials 5 times a week across Europe for a 1-hour meeting, things like that, right? So we decided that the strategy there is twofold, but it was based on 1 or 2 years of looking at research, doing research, and speaking with campaigners with a lot of experience in this field.
So it's, if I understand, to try to explain this in a 7-year-old, the way you approach your position on issues would be balancing between the academic approach, what research says, and what is possible.
Exactly.
So that does this mean that you also listen to the voices of industries and try to understand how much you can push your agenda and what is actually possible and how fast?
Yes, so we absolutely speak with industry. So I work in an NGO, but I can say that I really can't stand a very dogmatic view or a label that someone is just bad. There is bad and good everywhere, and it depends on on who is speaking and whose view it is. So we and I personally do work with companies. I talk with companies and I learn from companies, and that's very important for me personally, and I think quite important to the position that I now take and the knowledge that I have. But it's important to, when we talk to companies, so for example, when we talk about regulating car makers, we wouldn't only talk to car makers, because of course if I ask you, Chris, can I please ban something from you next year, you'll say no, it's not possible, because you don't want to sometimes, right? You have other interests. So what we try to is to speak with a broader set of companies in this field. So there is a car maker, but there is also a battery manufacturer, which is a future industry that wants to grow, right? There is maybe also a charging provider. There's a company in the energy field. So talking to an ecosystem of companies to really understand what's going on, rather than asking just the company that's been impacted, because that won't always give you the right answer. No one wants to be regulated or controlled. That's just, again, a very human thing. So we need to get a broader view. But generally, to sum up to a 7-year-old, how do we arrive at our positions? It's a combination of what needs to happen. There's climate science, it's quite clear, actually, or what for this specific sector is feasible. This is where academic research and expertise comes in, plus, indeed, the politics. What is actually possible to achieve politically, given what we've learned on the academic side?
Maybe this is a good moment to speak about an example of a specific project that you worked on. Because I think that you don't often see initiatives in Brussels that are done by a single organization. It's usually a mix of logos you see on invitations to debates, and I think the conclusion is that it helps if you align your message with other organizations who represent maybe a broader perspective, so the lawmakers see that this is not a voice of just one stakeholder, but many. And I have a question, and of course also, if possible, request to prove this by an example. How important and how do you approach building alliances like this, working with other organizations, not only business, but maybe other NGOs?
Yes, so I absolutely agree with you that any law or anything that has happened in Brussels has ever been achieved just by one person or one organization. It's always a network a movement, if you're in the climate movement, right, or a combination of actors. And partnerships are really, really important. We do a lot of that. In fact, I think Politico once called us the king of the letter, because we as TNE do a lot of joint letters. Because indeed, for what you said before, if we come as TNE to the Commission President and say we want this or that EV target, she's like, well, great, thanks TNE. But if it is TNE plus a number of companies, even car makers who would be influenced by that, plus, a number of other NGOs from health or from city perspective, then it's clear that there is a broader societal need, or at least agreement, for this, as opposed to one organization. And I think that's really important. It's important to show the kind of the democratic aspect of it, right? The broader political buy-in. That's why we do it. I can give you an example. So a few years back, when we first started working on the key part of the European Green Deal, the proposal to only have zero emission, mostly electric, new cars by 2035, we knew that everyone will know that we support that, right? Many NGOs support that. That's easy. But what about industry? So we actually kicked off the project, which I led at the time, where we tried to put together a joint call. It's a website. It's still a living website. You can still see it now, showing the different companies across Europe that are in favor of this so-called phase out of combustion cars. And as part of that, we managed to get Volvo Cars, for example, to sign it as well. So they were also with us on that call. Also, Ford Europe supported it. So 2 car makers actually were in favor. And then, of course, a lot of companies from the battery supply chain, charging supply chain, and other NGOs. And that was very, very influential, because as a politician, you open a call where you see an NGO and the industry from the same field saying something jointly. And there's even a joke at some point, if TNE and ASEA, so the Car Industry Association, ask for something together, there's no need for a political process. we can just agree with that, right? Because you have really 2 opposite sides asking for something, and that was quite successful. But maybe I can also...
Yeah,
yes.
sorry.
Maybe I can share with you my personal project that I'm most excited about. It's not so much a cooperation project. Of course, there were a lot of people involved. But if I had to write a book about my achievements, before I die, what is the policy thing I remember? So for me, it would definitely be the European battery regulation. Lots of people were involved. I don't want to take it from anyone. Fantastic people I worked with along the way. But there was this moment in 2017, and there was the European Battery Alliance, all the companies together. I was there, so we were one of the few NGOs in the room, because we do talk and work with companies. And as part of that, it was said, well, we need some kind of rules, sustainability rules in Europe to give rewards to local manufacturing, a concept I fully agree with. But it was a completely blank slate. Right? You can just write what you want on it. So I spent a few months talking to lots of smart minds, as I said before, it's never just sitting on a balcony looking at the trees. And I come forward with this kind of overall structure for this, that we need to look at carbon footprint, circularity, and, which was completely new at the time, responsible sourcing practices. So really transparent supply chains. And within these 3 pillars, we were working for a long time. And today, the final battery law is indeed based on those 3 pillars. And a lot of the ideas in the final law is what we as TNE recommended back in 2018. So I'm personally really excited and also proud of that. That was a really cool achievement in my view.
And how did you know it was a good achievement? The question is about measuring results of your work. How do you know if you've done a good work in this job?
So there's 2 answers to this, right? So obviously the ultimate answer is you want to see impact on the ground. But when you pass the law, it takes some time to see the impact. But ultimately, for example, the car CO2 regulations, something I worked on for the past 15 years, I see the results because there has been an influx of electric vehicles in Europe. So you know that the law that we worked so hard on as TNE is working because the market is changing, right? This is it's all about the real change on the ground. I don't really care about KPIs, how many events or papers you did. But but maybe speaking about the laws, ultimately, indeed, what we do, or what I do, is looking at the final law and how close the final text is to what we need to happen, right? Are there binding targets there rather than just roadmaps? Is there some kind of clear commitments that would drive change? And looking at the final text of the law, comparing it with what we believe should happen, for me, is how I would measure the success on this in particular.
That's interesting. And when I think about what you are working on, electric vehicles, cars, that is something that has, in I think, a lot to do with data, also with computer programs. It's not only cars as in the past, just mechanics. And I wanted to ask you, this recent speed up in AI development, those quite important changes from the consumer's point of view right now. How have they influenced your work? Or maybe this is not something significant because for you it has been something important already before we learned about ChatGPT.
So actually, it hasn't really influenced my work. If we speak about me personally, I'm generally a lot more of a... So I'm not that good with IT, is the honest answer. I know it exists. I asked it 1 or 2 questions. It was kind of helpful, but I just like to read and learn myself. But I do see generally, not just GTPI, but across the kind of AI, there is now a lot of programs and software to help work. And I do see in my work, but especially in the work of my colleagues who are really analysts, that it can be really helpful, right? It can speed up the information gathering exercise, for example. It can make some processes more efficient. These days, you can even, access a program that can come to meetings if you can't make it and take summaries for you. So there's obviously a lot of these things that are quite helpful. We're actually currently doing a bit of an assessment within our organization on how different AI programs and opportunities can really make our organization more effective, right? So I do think generally it will make a big difference to many people and many companies. But maybe if we talk about more vehicles, right? If we talk about the AI in vehicles or autonomous vehicles, here you generally have opportunities, but also concerns. Because on the one hand, it's very easy. You can think of a more efficient system. These vehicles, where they're going, driving at the right speed, everything works perfectly. But on the other hand, someone who doesn't drive or, doesn't like driving, suddenly there is an autonomous vehicle. You can imagine so much more demand and so much more private usage of something that becomes a lot easier, right? So from a city's perspective, or generally the mobility perspective, there are a lot of concerns with these technologies making mobility even more of a commodity and kind of overused, right? Overconsumption of it. So it's quite important to put in place safeguards. So some person just doesn't randomly drive in their AI, or you can't find a parking in a city, so you just send your autonomous vehicle driving around waiting for you, right? This can't really happen. So we do need to think about broader societal implications of this, and there needs to be some safeguards in place as well.
So that we can keep trusting our cars.
Keep trusting our cars, absolutely, but also keep not clogging the cities with our cars as well.
So, in now from your perspective, is that something you would call a key development in the clean transport industry, the data and the autonomous driving perspectives, or is there something else that is on top of mind should be on top of mind of lawmakers right
so
now?
I wouldn't. I mean, it's definitely one. It's one of the of important trends. It's not the one that makes me most excited, right? So if I mention if I look a bit broader, I actually think that the most exciting thing that has happened in the last 10 years in the sector is the drop in prices and the improvement in battery technology. It's only because batteries are as cheap as they are today and as efficient and as innovative in terms of their chemistry that we can have electric vehicles. So everything that's happening on the battery innovation side is fascinating. We are moving even to sodium ion batteries. So batteries made from salt that can be so much more expensive and so much more cheaper and ubiquitous, for example. And there's so many innovations now going more kind of into the battery supply chain. We can now refine nickel in a clean way, just using some kind of bio products. Basically, we can now get lithium just from geothermal brines without much impact on the environment. So all of these innovations around clean materials really excite me, and I think it's really critical for the supply chain and also for Europe to be in this supply chain, because innovative technologies is our edge as Europeans. But another sector which is really exciting at the moment, in my view, is the cusp and interlinkage of transport and energy sectors. As we electrify vehicles, it's all becoming about two things. First of all, electricity, right? So your energy in that vehicle, that's the energy system. But two, if we think about charging infrastructure, it's all about grids. How quickly we can connect that charger really depends on how good the grid is, how modern it is, etc. Grids, again, is energy. So there's no longer transport or energy. It becomes one big part. And the electric vehicle is really at the cusp of it, because as an electric vehicle, it can be something that takes electricity to charge, but it can also be a battery on wheels that can also discharge and help the energy system. So this idea of a vehicle-to-grid technologies, right, the bidirectional charging, really, really excites me. And I hope that we as TNE rebrand and become transport and energy rather than transport and environment.
I have a question that is very specifically related to the year we are in, 2024, the year of the European election, which means that a lot of processes are on hold. And for many organizations, that's a tricky moment where you sometimes don't know what to do with your activities and how to use this time efficiently to be ready to maybe have some advantage when the new parliament gets to work, when the new commission is already there. So would you have some advice on how to make best use of this time now that is available, and how to get yourself ready for the new term?
Yes, absolutely. Well, an excellent question. We often say at TNE, this will be a quiet year, and it never is. So one thing to say, maybe more of a technicality, but the policy never really stops. The big decisions might stop, but all sorts of implementing regulations, and standards are all going through. So there's still a lot going on, by the way, and we're working on that is still happening. But to answer your question more broadly, absolutely, this is the time to prepare for the next commission. But it's not just prepare as in, read up and I don't know, and kind of prepare your manifesto. It's about, it's the time. So if you want to put anything on the Commission's agenda, the time is now, right? It's the time when political parties put their manifestos together. So if you want your idea in, you need to have good analysis or a campaign for that to be noticed. The Commission hearings are coming as well in September, right? So before September is really the time to put out their new ideas backed by evidence, support, all the usual stuff for example, members of the European Parliament to notice them so they can be part of the hearings in September. So I actually find this a very, very important and busy period right now, where it's about putting things on the agenda, preparing your evidence. So we're putting a lot of reports out, for example, about new things that are missing, putting together campaigns and working with other people also to call on the future Commission and Parliament to do things. So a very typical advocacy work, I would say, in Brussels, with the sole difference that there is no law on the agenda. You have to create the space for your issue, which is even harder than usual.
Julia, you have been in Brussels around so long, and I already asked you about the pros and cons of your job, but now focusing on the EU bubble as an industry, as a community of people, if you would have some sort of magic wand and you could change one thing that would make the way the EU bubble, the EU political bubble works better, what would that be? What would be your one top thing to improve?
So maybe one thing that I get frustrated with as I go through political cycles a few times is the inability to do new things. We are kind of stuck in the framework, and it's almost like the framework is running us as opposed to us, politicians and leaders and stakeholders, creating the framework, right? So sometimes there is a good idea and it's clear things are not working. But when you bring that idea to the table, it can be an NGO, can be a company, the answer is, but it's not allowed within the current framework. And that really frustrates me because I see how America is doing things, right? It's amazing. They're like, right, we're behind Europe and definitely behind China on clean technologies. We're just going to do a new thing, the US Inflation Reduction Act, right? And we don't care about what others will say. This is what we need to do. Bum. And I wish we had more of that of this in Europe, that courage to kind of, when you come out of water like a dog, you kind of shake off all your water, shake off the old stuff, and you create the new framework or the new law that really fits today as opposed to something from the past.
And when you encounter a male-dominated panel in Brussels, what's your initial thought?
Look, I have to say things got a lot better in the last few years. I really have so much respect for organizations like the Brussels Binder and many others, who put the agenda on the table because it's really a lot better. It happens very rarely. But when this happens, when it happened in the past, so I joined the panel and I see that so I say I'm the only woman, right? And people are looking at me like, she's the token one for the diversity. So I think, bring it on, because by the end of that panel, I many times people are looking at me and talking to me rather than the others, right? So I know that my success and my worth is not because I'm a token woman, but I would really just, make one plea or message to those listening that are organizing an event, do invest in making a diverse panel, because there are so many fantastic, smart, senior professional women out there. And those that say it's not possible are just being a little bit lazy in my view.
That's true, and great that you mentioned the Brussels binder. I have used it myself in the past to research experts, and the good thing about the Brussels binder is actually that they not only show experts from within the Brussels bubble, but also just interesting experts who can contribute to a debate or project. One thing that I usually ask, I think by now I asked it to most of the guests of this podcast, is a question about work-life balance, because we are on the podcast talking about the professional part of life, but something that I believe is often overlooked by people thinking how to design their careers and their work lives is actually taking care of themselves, of their health. So when I say work-life balance, is this something that you think you have a good grasp of in your life, and maybe you have some hints to share with the audience?
So I'm definitely trying. It's important to me. I wouldn't lie that I succeed all the time. No, sometimes I don't. But generally, I think it's really important to understand what do you like as a person and what gives you energy. So I am a typical extrovert. For me, no matter how busy or stressful the day was, the best thing is to, either with my partner or with my friends, to go out, check out a new restaurant, have a good glass of red wine. A good glass of red wine is quite high on that list of things that really help me. And it really helps. Just being around people really helps. I, of course, try all the usual things that people do. I do exercise. I like power yoga. The more older I get, the more I like to sleep, and eat healthily. I do all of these things. But I think one thing that is different in my life than maybe from what I sometimes see around is my group of friends, closest friends, are not in my direct work bubble. That means that when I see them, some are in communication, some are in culture, some are in IT. We really talk about life and different things. We don't really bring work back home after work. And that really helps. For example, if you told me, Julia, can we talk about this on a Saturday? I would say, no way. And that really helps me.
So setting boundaries is one of the
Yes,
ways
absolutely.
to
With a
start,
good
actually,
glass of
thinking
red
about
wine.
balance.
Yes.
Julia, thank you very much for this insightful conversation and for giving us so much of your time. And to everyone who listened to this conversation, also thank you for being with us. For me, it was a great pleasure. Julia Poliscanova from Transport and Environment was our guest today. Thank you, Julia.
Thank you so much. It was really fun talking to you, Chris.